Welcome to Complicated Opportunities, a CosmereRPG podcast with a couple of GMs. This week, we are going to be joined by Andrew Fischer. Andrew, the last title I know for sure was you were the lead designer. Is that still your title? Because I feel like every time we talk to someone from Brotherwise, it changes.
Yeah, well, we're definitely kind of in a transitional period right now, as because we're wrapping up the Mistborn books. They're just getting prepped to go off to the printer. So for the last 2 years and change, I have led the design, and so I was the lead designer throughout Stormlight and Mistborn, and kind of helped establish the system. And now, as I am moving on to Plotweaver, which is our name for the system overall that the CosmereRPG uses. um, I am handing the reins of lead designer over to Lydia, who is one of the members of the design team who has been here throughout the process. So she is taking over as lead designer uh, as I head over onto Plotweaver. But I have been the lead designer for the last couple of years.
Awesome. Yeah,
Nice.
so and the other title I have is game designer at Earthborn Games as well. Honestly, I don't know much about Earthborn Games, so I'm kind of excited to hear a little bit about it. If you want to go into it, we'll kind of
Yeah,
let you
totally.
decide how you want to do that.
That's in addition to my work with Brotherwise, I am the design director over there at Earthborn, and we are a smaller studio. Our debut title, Earthborn Rangers, came out a couple years ago. It is a cooperative narrative adventure card game set in this far future setting. So it's kind of like half role playing game, half card game, and you play through this very kind of optimistic open world adventure in this far future setting. The other big thing that Earthborn does is we try to make our games as sustainably as possible. So all of our games, there's no plastic, everything's FSC certified. We try to print as locally to our customers as possible to reduce international freight and things. So I do that, and then I also consult over here with Brotherwise, leading the CosmereRPG.
Man, that's awesome. Like, I love hearing about Earthborn and Earthborn Rangers. I've listened to a couple of your interviews, so that I need to dive into that a little more myself.
Yeah, if anybody's curious, just go check out some YouTube reviews. I mean, I say that we got some pretty good reviews, so people ended up liking the game. But go check out Shut Up and Sit Down, or whatever. If you're at all curious about the game, they do a much better job going into that depth and explaining about it than I will here. So yeah,
It sounds really
Uh,
cool. I'll have to check them out after we're done here. Now, how did you get your start in the game industry? What did that sort of avenue look like for you?
yeah. Well, so I actually went to college for computer science. Um, And while doing that, I got in my head that I wanted to work on video games, but at the time, not a lot of like game design education programs really existed. Um, so I was trying to kind of make it work by taking art classes and uh, comp sci classes, and then I switched over to going to one of those kind of crappy for-profit uh, video game design schools, and so I was kind of struggling to find an avenue. And at the time, one of the teachers I was working with had friends at Fantasy Flight Games, and kind of put me in contact with them and got me started playtesting for them. And I think I was a very enthusiastic playtester. I and I did a lot of work, really kind of like volunteered for a lot of different things, was kind of doing my own designs and talking to them about them, and got a lot of FaceTime with those folks. And at a certain point, a new job opened up there, and they just told me, "Hey, you should apply for this." And so I ended up starting at FFG, working on the Warhammer 40K role playing games. So I worked on, let's see here, Death Watch, Dark Heresy, Only War, all those kind of Warhammer 40, that era of Warhammer 40K RPG. So I started there in their role playing department, and then throughout my time at FFG, I worked on the Star Wars role playing games, which was a big influence here on the Cosmere RPG. I also then moved over into board games, miniatures games, card games, and then ended up as FFG's digital director after many years, overseeing their kind of app integrated board games like Mansions of Madness on my shelves back there, which I worked on with Nikki Valens, and then I oversaw a bunch of our other app integrated games there. So that was kind of my avenue, was very much FFG through an introduction. And then I left FFG kind of a little after the start of the pandemic to work on at Earthborn Games, and then as well as other gigs like working with Brotherwise.
Nice, nice. So you mentioned a really long history with FFG. Uh, what what is the process? Sorry, we're getting just into game design stuff instead of Cosmere right away. What
No,
is the process of integrating an app to a game? Because like, there's a couple that I would really love apps for that I play.
yeah, well, so there's kind of a couple different levels that an app can be integrated into a game. Like, I think what a lot of people opt for is kind of the supplemental app, which is the game stands on its own, and then you just have an app that's kind of a helper that either replaces some of the most fiddly parts of the game's tracking or otherwise provides an extra service that makes playing the game a little easier. I think that's what you see the most of. A lot of what we did were games that actually required an app, where the app is part of the game design. That one's a lot trickier because, you know, instead of the app just being this kind of helper that you add on, it is this integrated part of the game. And you need to make sure that the way your game is designed, that the app is required or like not required,
Yeah.
but integral to the game design experience, that it is accomplishing something that you couldn't accomplish without it. Because otherwise, why are you going through this extra expense and hassle of involving this like a lot more ephemeral thing in this digital software into your game experience? So, we had to make sure that the games that we were making were doing something that couldn't be done otherwise, which is definitely an involved process. Probably one I could spend hours talking about. So I don't want to
Yeah.
derail us too much.
No. So to wrap it back into the main topic, was there ever a consideration for a more app involved Cosmere RPG?
Mm. Not like at the core systems level. One awesome thing about the role playing game industry is how many services there are that provide kind of that supplemental app experience now or digital experience. A lot of them, honestly, if you ask my opinion these days, I think browser based stuff is almost always the way to go because, especially if it's mobile adaptive, like it can get onto your phone screen. Um, a browser based app is just going to have a much longer lifespan and be easier to support than a dedicated phone app that has to live on their
A mobile. Okay.
yeah, like on the mobile app ecosystems. So anyway, because things like Demiplane and Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds and all these different supplemental apps and websites exist for RPGs, like we knew that we wanted to just partner with them and tap into those services because they're going to do it way better and way more efficiently than Brotherwise possibly could, right? Like, sure,
Yeah. Yeah.
Brotherwise
For sure.
would have to spin up a whole team dedicated to software and support just to get something that's probably not even going to be as good as what Demiplane can provide. So I think we knew we wanted a digital component, but pretty early on, just from a practicality standpoint, we wanted to just work with partners like that. But I will say that's not necessarily limiting though, because Demiplane is, especially on larger projects like the Cosmere RPG, is pretty willing. They have all these engineers who play the game, talk to us, and like do all sorts of work to make their backend custom work for whatever system you're making. And so you can really push the innovation and they'll figure it out. And like they've done that for several different systems now. So they were a pretty good partner to work with on this.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're big fans of the Demiplane people. They've been really cool. We just interviewed one of their cheat designers.
Oh, cool.
And so sort of we've covered a couple of our notes here. I didn't know you were on since the beginning of the project for Cosmere RPG. How much of the idea was formed? Were you approached with like, hey, we want you as a designer, we're working on this project, then you learn it's Cosmere, or was it it was
I
probably Stormlight RPG specifically back then, but
Yeah, yeah, they were. Well, I knew it was the Cosmere RPG pretty early on. Um, they, you sign NDAs before you
yeah.
do take a lot of these job pitches. I actually got connected to this project by Max Brook, who is a good friend of mine. We met and worked on a bunch of the FFG stuff together. So we met there, and so he got contacted by Brotherwise, and when they were talking to him, was like, "Hey, can I loop in my buddy Andrew Fischer, because like Max and I have done a lot of work together in the past, and also he knew that I had my friend's book club had recently been reading through all of the Cosmere and stuff, and so he knew I was pretty knowledgeable. And so he actually ended up connecting me in. And when we very first started on the project, it didn't really exist yet. Johnny was just assembling the initial team for it. But we were just consulting designers. So we were just coming in, I've got my full-time job at Earthborn. We were just coming in to kind of consult and offer our expertise from all the different role-playing systems we'd worked on. However, as the team kind of grew and evolved and changed during development, kind of the need for a lead designer emerged, and I, because of my personality, had already kind of proposed a lot of the core systems of the game and taken a very kind of leading role. And so Johnny approached me and asked me, "Hey, do you just want to fully lead this project at this stage?" And I said yes. So it was just too exciting an opportunity, and I was having a lot of fun on the project, so I took it on.
That's awesome. So was that Buddy's book club your introduction to the Cosmere, or had you
Yeah,
read it
it was.
previously?
I obviously was aware of the Cosmere. I think I'd read like Mistborn or something before that. Just like a little bit. But
Yeah.
yeah, I have this friend group that we have like a Discord server where we'll read various lengthy series together and talk about them. So we had just wrapped up Malazan Book of the Fallen, if you're familiar.
Yeah,
All
I
10
tried
books
to
of that.
start that one. Audio
It's
could
Not there yet.
not do it. It's a tough
it's
audio
dense.
start. I think if I read it, I could do it.
It's it's dense. I think in a conversation with Brandon, he once described it as he was talking about the Cosmere learning. Oh, and there's Gardens of the Moon. Nice.
Oh yeah.
Brandon described, the Cosmere learning curve and Malazan as a learning cliff.
It
Yeah,
felt
that's
like
so
that, yeah.
real. Yeah, so
But
real.
so we had just wrapped that up, and we were looking for something a little like more cinematic and like a little less like of that kind of density of writing that
Mhm.
Erickson does. And so somebody suggested we, jump into Way of Kings. So that kind of got our start, and then we ended up going from there. At the time, I think Rhythm of War had just come out. Was that it? I don't remember exactly. Maybe we came back for Rhythm of War, but anyway, we ended up bouncing around and doing most of the Cosmere together as this book club. Uh, so that was kind of that's when I like dove fully into the Cosmere. Before that, it had just been like little bits.
Yeah. Well, nice. Now, what in the gamifying of the Cosmere, how did that did you feel pretty confident in what style of game you thought it should be from the rip, or was there a couple iterations?
Oh, there was a lot. Like early exploration was pretty open. So Johnny O'Neill from Brotherwise was kind of the creative director. So he had rough visions for how he kind of wanted to work. Um, and he and Brandon had sat down and talked a lot and he had kind of gotten Brandon's thoughts, and Brandon had a lot of feelings on for an RPG that encapsulated the whole Cosmere. Brandon was a big role player when he was younger, and he talked us through a lot of those stories and like how his experiences from role playing kind of informed what a lot of his writing, and then also how he thought that should inform the kind of game that would feel would best represent the Cosmere. So we had kind of Brandon's thoughts, we had Johnny's thoughts. So that kind of gave us this rough framework. And that's part of the reason that like Max and I were brought on is, Johnny had played a lot of Star Wars, and he felt that the kind of narrative resource system that Star Wars used, and honestly a lot of other modern games are using.
It's getting much more popular, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, especially with our contemporaries like Daggerheart, a lot of other people have kind
Yeah.
of the yes, yes, and yes, but no, and no, but kind of array
Even
of
a
results. Is
crunchier game like Draw Steel has Malice for the
Yep.
director, yeah.
Uh, so anyway, he felt like that was so he knew he kind of wanted some D20 influence, and for this large kind of 5e audience, as well as just Brandon's own personal experiences and preferences and of what he thought would best work for the Cosmere. We knew we wanted some of that kind of more traditional like D20 style system, but we knew we wanted a little bit of that kind of narrative influence. And so he knew he wanted kind of that balance to some degree. But it was that's basically as specific as it got, right? It's a lot of these like pillars. He set out these
Mhm.
pillars that we then use to kind of guide how we do our initial iteration. So when we started diving into that system initially, we had, because we're all over the country, well, actually all over the world, we've got a lot of different contributors from different places. We were mostly working in Google Docs and stuff initially. So we actually had a Google Slides because it's nice because you can just drop anything in there. And then,
Yeah.
we had different sections of the Google Slides on different parts of the system. Like here's core task resolution, here's skills. And people would just, you create slides and you like drop in a bunch of different ideas and brainstorm a bunch of different ideas. And then people who, if that inspires something, they'd copy your slide, like make it like version 2.1 of this idea, and then like make some tweaks and like, you drop text, you drop images. And so we had like, in that, we had like dozens of different like dice systems for core task resolution, different like skill arrays, or what do skills do and how do they inform, like how do we represent investiture in a way that is like flexible enough but specific enough to handle all these different planets and magic systems. So we had this big old document of like brainstorming ideas early on. And then what really kind of helped us hone down was we did like a retreat out to Utah and got to like sit down with Brandon, talk over his ideas in specific, and then we would kind of go back to the house we were staying at and like just directly iterate on a lot of these ideas we had generated and play test them in quick little play tests. And then we were able to bring these and like play test them with like Dan Wells and show them to Brandon and talk to him and get feedback and kind of go back and forth. So we did that we were there for maybe like a week or so, 4 to 6 days. I don't remember exactly how long, but so we kind of had this concentrated retreat where we honed in, and that's when we honed in on the plot die and how that core task resolution would work. So we kind of took that cloud of ideas and honed it into what we thought would be a good place to start for us. There were things that were different about it back then. Like I think raise the stakes, the idea of raising the stakes existed to some degree, and the plot die existed to some degree. But of course, as we actually started diving into more design on the system, those did change a little. So I don't remember exactly the form it took, but I think that was the moment that really crystallized the core of the system.
Yeah. Now, in Bizarro World, where you guys didn't go with D20 rolls to like run the core tests, what dice system almost made it?
Oh, there were a bunch. Actually, one of my favorite that I was championing was bizarrely similar to and this is kind of before Daggerheart there was anything involving, but it was
Yeah.
bizarrely similar to Daggerheart. We like it wasn't exactly the same, but like it used D12s. It used the D12s to generate either positive or negative narrative resources. So there was one there that like I'm actually even though it was definitely my favorite, I think. I'm kind of glad we didn't go with because I think we would have ended up like,
That is incredibly similar, yeah.
yeah, like considering us and Daggerheart came out so close together, like I think it would have muddled the two games a bit. And like, so I'm kind of glad that we ended up not going with that one.
Yeah. I, slavishly like the D20 because it's what I'm comfortable with. And that probably was a driving decision that it's what a lot of people are comfortable with, I gotta assume.
Oh, for sure. That
Yeah.
definitely like I said, one of our core pillars was to marry the familiar with the new, and that D20 is the familiar, right? Like being able to see
Yeah.
that, being able to roll that, like, there's people with D20 tattoos and like it is very core to a lot of people's role-playing experience. And so when I say we had this big spectrum of ideas, a good chunk of them were different D20 ideas, different things that use the D20 in different ways. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, I think that was one of our big factors for going with the D20 and the plot die. Though I will say it wasn't the only one. There are a lot of other things about the system we went with we ended up liking. Like even the flexibility of raising the stakes. It's definitely something a lot of people are unsure about when they first start. Like, oh, why don't we just throw this in every time? But it's actually one of the things. It's it's kind of secretly making your narrative results more special. It's the same with the blank faces on the plot die. A lot of people are like, "Oh, those are disappointing," right? But like they are, yeah, yeah, but they are causing your narrative results to be more special. And I think you can look to like Hope and Fear in Daggerheart. I feel bad. I'm harping on Daggerheart today, but you can look at Hope and Fear in Daggerheart. They just come up way more often, and like it works, but they become more of a resource and less of a interesting
It's
plot
less of a
twist.
spice and more of like the body of the meal. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
way of stating it. So we wanted this to be that spice, right? And so uh, that was another big factor in choosing this approach over something like one of those other approaches I mentioned.
Yeah. So you kind of like dove into a thing I like to get into. Sorry, Kyle. This isn't a heavy Kyle episode, folks. Um so like I don't love the blanks on the plot die.
Mhm.
And I think part of that is as a like long-term GM, sorry as I move the cat. Um I feel like I know the amount I want to ask for it.
Mhm.
So like I'm already controlling that influx and the blanks feel like it's not the best feeling. Um
Yeah, and if
how
you
long
have
were the
like an
blanks on the
idea,
plot die for?
yeah, if you have that idea as the GM where you're like, oh, I really want a side effect to trigger, and then it doesn't, you're like, oh, well, crap.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
So how long have there been blanks on the plot die? Was it ever a different size of die? Was it, you know?
We messed around with a couple. Honestly, one of the big factors, and this is a lesson I learned from Star Wars as well. One of the factors for using the D6 is you just get more physical space to work with on a D6. Um, to like when you tool a die, your tools are only so precise, and so the detail of your symbol is going to be determined by your tool and the space you have to work with. And by the time you get down to like especially like D8s
A
are
12
okay.
or a
Yeah,
10
D10
sided
is
die,
the
yeah.
worst. So that triangle's so skinny. Like the Star Wars dice, I think we did a pretty good job of balancing it. But before Star Wars, we had Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and we put like symbols on D10s, and I think some of the D10 faces had two symbols on it, and you cannot even tell what that symbol is supposed to be. They just end up as blobs. So the D6 helps with that space. But apologies, I digress. Your question was about the blanks initially.
Yeah, I mean it can be both. I love the plot die. I want the whole history of the plot die as a specific book.
Yeah, so we looked at a few different versions of the plot die. I think when we came out of that retreat I talked about, I don't think it had blanks on it at that point. But we very quickly found that adding in every test, like I said, was
Too much.
yeah, to your point, it became the body of the meal, not the spice. Um, and even when it had all the symbols, it was still pretty reliable. And like, well, the opportunity and complication are a positive result and a negative result. They are still both
They're both interesting.
yeah, they're both
Yeah.
interesting. And like to create a full spectrum of results, like sometimes you want that disappointment. And while it is frustrating to have that plot die come up, that frustration increases the specialness of when they trigger. Another big thing the plot die or the blanks give us is I'll tell you, when we initially put on the blanks on the die, they weren't blanks. Uh, they were actually a third symbol initially. Uh, and that third symbol was a contextual symbol that only triggers based on certain abilities. But one thing that we realized was like, hey,
That
it,
doesn't
it was
feel great.
it was confusing to people when
Yeah.
there's a symbol that doesn't do anything, right? And we can just trigger abilities off of blanks, right? And so ultimately, the blank is kind of from a design space consideration is a
A
knob,
third
is a
symbol.
lever. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is another symbol that we can use uh, and to add more texture to the plot die through abilities. We don't do that a ton in Stormlight. We do it a little bit more in Mistborn, and I think as we venture into the wider Cosmere, you'll see this happen more and more. But uh, it is just another knob or lever from the plot die that we can use as game designers to make the results more interesting.
Yeah. Well, cool. I'm very interested in the plot die in general. Merrick told us about this time where the blanks on the plot die meant you sort of stored it on your sheet to roll again at your leisure.
Yes, yep. That
And I thought that
that
was a
version lasted a
cool
while.
idea that I might like steal for my home game. And he gave reasons why they moved away from it, or you guys moved away from it, which makes sense. But you know,
Yeah.
it's homebrew.
Yeah, that version was in play for a bit actually. And that actually, yeah, that was a kind of an iteration on a couple versions. We'd always wanted like a shared narrative resource, kind of like Destiny points from Star Wars. And a lot of my design pitches were involved the plot die not only being the die you rolled, but also being the resource. So like there's like a pool of plot dice in the middle, and it eventually evolved to this storing it on your own sheet. And then the examples Merrick gave in that episode, we eventually went away from that as well. Ultimately, it was shifting a lot of the attention of the game onto the narrative instead onto these like kind of metagamey mechanics. But you will see some of these ideas. To my point about design space, you'll see some of these ideas return in content instead of in core systems eventually.
Yeah, that's a good place for it. I am now super curious because, we both ran at Dragonsteel, so we got a peek of some Mistborn abilities, just from like what the characters had access to. And there was the manipulating fortune that looks like it ties in heavily with the plot die. And I'm excited to see that full tree when we eventually get to it.
You actually
Yeah.
just made a point that it's actually one of the questions I have on here. It's one of the few that I have on here because mostly, like I said, this is an Irving heavy episode. But like, so one of my frustrations, and I'm not trying to harp, but like on Daggerheart is the hope and fear is every single roll, right?
Mhm.
And like you said, it does eventually become a resource. So how did you guys walk that line between, hey, we've got this new cool thing that's the plot die, but then we also want to keep the regular crunch of D&D Pathfinder because this is what people are that's what people are used to. Like, it's honestly what brought me on. I've had a struggle getting into Fantasy Flight because I played the D20 Star Wars. That's actually my majority
Oh
of
yeah.
my experience is a New Jedi Order campaign. So how did you decide to walk that line where the plot die isn't like the narrative isn't the whole thing? And I forget it was either Ross or Merrick said that, and I think I've even heard Johnny or even you say it in interviews, like it's crunchy in between sessions, but then when you get on the table, you just play. And I feel like
Mhm.
that's just such a good, easy jump into the designs or the RPG. How did that design conversation go?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you ask about towing the line on the plot die itself. One very specific answer on that is um, we, we kind of balance how much it's involved by just handing it to the GM, like raising the stakes. It's the one thing about RPG design that's like this awesome release valve that you have, which is just the GM, right? Like, uh, ultimately, like I've designed a lot of card games, miniatures games, board games, and these apps and things. So like games that don't have that tool, and ultimately everything falls back onto the system. And here you can fall back onto the GM sometimes, and like that's what we do with the plot die, right? It's like it was like how much is this getting used? Well, how much does the GM want it, right? Like, and that's you have to kind of toe this line between descriptive and prescriptive mechanics, uh, and like that's a time when we decided to hand it a bit more to them. But to talk a little more broadly to your question about the game overall, the complexity was definitely a big consideration. It was one of our pillars talking about the complexity of the game. And I think, like, if I'm being honest with you, I think it landed more complex, a little crunchier than my target for it. That's there's a lot of different factors that play into that, from like the complexity of the Cosmere overall and everything that we need to like simulate about the Cosmere. There's just a lot going on. So you like if your game's a little crunchier, you're going to need a lot to support that. But there's other factors as well, from like bringing on a lot of different designers from that have worked on more complicated systems, to just the editing process as it tries to add, like Laura's this our incredible editor Laura did a really good job kind of helping get the system to be, and like the wording of the system to be, really robust and like complete as far as making sure there's no gaps in how the mechanics are working. But that just adds perceived complexity as like, you add more text and more clarification to kind of help make the system more robust. So I will say I think it ended up a little more complex than I'd intended it originally, but that happens in a lot of systems, to be honest. So as far as what we were setting out to do, we kind of wanted to toe that line between and give people the crunch, like feeling like they had enough meat to really dive into their systems and build these combos in the rules that you honestly see characters engaging in the books. Where one thing Brandon talked a lot about at some of our initial meetings was how like a lot of his characters that he writes power game the rules, right? Like I think he's told this story in other interviews. He had this D&D necromancer when he was younger that in his role-playing campaigns, where he kind of power game the rules to create this like this totally overpowered necromancer character, and he kind of games the rules of the universe, and that kind of informed how some of his characters kind of take his magic systems and game them a little to, gain these fantastic powers. And so we knew we wanted players to have a similar experience. We needed enough crunch to make you feel like you could be solving that puzzle instead of just saying your character solved that puzzle in the narrative. Um, uh, so we had this kind of pillar for the complexity we wanted to hit. And then as far as how do we actually meet that pillar in execution, that's unfortunately there's not like an easy snappy answer to that, and it's a lot of iteration, right? Like I'll tell you, a lot of it was Ross and I sitting in meetings together, looking at different versions of surges, being like, is this too complex? Like, we wanted to as accurately model this surge to the books as possible, and we're sitting there like, this is too much, right, for a new player. How do we rewrite this surge to give them a bit more narrative freedom and a little less crunch that they have to memorize and figure out? And so less of a glamorous process and a lot of just elbow grease on Ross and I's part, like especially in the surges, kind of honing and making a complex version and a very simple version, and then kind of trying to find the middle ground.
I'll be a fly on the wall during those conversations.
That
for
would
sure.
have been so cool. Now, I have talked with Ross a bit, and he did specifically point to, and I forget the name. It's the cohesion surge where you get to like basically ride the rock shelf.
Mm-hmm.
Very, and he said that that's your design specifically. He blamed you for that one.
That one,
I like it a lot.
That was a pretty late addition, I think, too. And that's a very good example of that kind of like narrative moment. Because in the earlier versions of Cohesion, that was theoretically possible. For a player who sat there and went, okay, if I extrapolate this part of the rules you have for Cohesion and like do this to my character with it, I can ride, surf the rock, right?
Yeah.
But like that was not, that is for somebody who's sitting there critically thinking about the rules like a Brandon Sanderson character would, and like trying to extrapolate what you can do with it. And while that is a cool experience, like I mentioned earlier, you also want the player who's just sitting down to feel cool and feel like a character from the books, and we were reading, like, I think when we were working on that, we had gotten the advanced chapters for Wind and Truth, like of that battle where Cohesion is used like wild. And like, we were like, oh man, we need like a button you can push to just do this thing. And so I kind of injected that in there. And I think we smoothed out some of the other complexity that let you model it otherwise, and then put that talent in that just let you do that.
And to my point of that I wanted to get to, how influenced by Avatar: The Last Airbender is that sort of tree? Because there's so many things in there where I'm just like, oh, this is earthbending in the coolest way it's been done in a game, and I love it.
I mean, I won't lie to you and tell you that Avatar does not influence us, because I'm pretty sure we've all watched it multiple times. And
yeah,
Johnny,
if it was a conscious decision or not, like either way, that's fine.
I like Johnny. I think Avatar might be Johnny's favorite property of all time. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he loves it. So
Magpie.
It's definitely an influence. We don't try very much, especially when working on other people's properties, to directly reference other properties or anything.
Yeah, certainly not. That would. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you say certainly not, but actually that's a common when I'm working with, I've worked on a lot of different licensed IPs, and like people will try to inject winks, like, and like, it's fun. You give homages and things, and sometimes the homage gets a little too overt. But like, it's especially like, we're working on Star Wars. Like, I don't want a talent that's just a direct reference to like a non-Disney property in the book, right? Like, so it's something you have to watch out for.
Yeah. Now, to the point of Star Wars, because I've heard some interviews with FFG Star Wars designers before, and talking about the licensor relationship in designing a game. How different is it with a company like Dragonsteel versus Lucasfilm? If you like, what you're allowed to say, if you're not allowed to say much.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it. I mean, also mostly because working with Dragonsteel is pretty cool. So like,
yeah,
if it was like terrible, I might like be a little more close-lipped. But like Dragonsteel, they've got quite a big operation, but it's right at this like sweet spot where it's small enough, especially when we started. I think it's even ramped up since then, but when we started, like, it's small enough that we got personal meetings with Brandon, and he's personally invested in this, and he, talked. We got to bounce ideas off of him and talk to him about what he wanted to see in the RPG. And he actually gets to be involved in the process. But big enough that we have the support network of people like Karen Ostrom who can, like, we can send our manuscript to, and she could go through with a fine tooth comb to make sure that we haven't made mistakes, right? So it's this kind of nice middle ground where we both get that personal attention, and they have the support staff to help us make sure we're not screwing up the IP. We have a very, I do not mean to, we have a very Cosmere knowledgeable team. We're very thorough, but, like, ultimately having the continuity editor go through it, she finds things that
That's pretty
even our
nice.
whole team missed, like, so overall working with Dragonsteel has been a really nice experience, compared to something like, I'm not going to, like, talk too much bad about, like, Lucasfilm or anybody, but when you're working with a larger company like that, I
There's
mean,
a lot more bureaucracy involved, I presume.
oh, for sure. And
Yeah.
keep in mind, when we started on Edge of the Empire with Star Wars, this is before Disney blew up canon and turned that all Legends. So we actually wrote the Edge of the Empire core book is in old Star Wars in the EU. Um, and then by Age of Rebellion, that's in new Star Wars. That's in Disney Star Wars. And so that transition happened while we were working on these books. So we went from working with, like, Leland Shee and Holocron to working with
Yeah.
the Disney Story Group throughout the process of working on these. And, like, and then keep in mind, this is, well, The Force Awakens is being made and The Last Jedi is being made. And so
Yeah.
the story group is just a handful of people who have to make all these decisions. And you think about it, some random board game company making a role-playing game versus J.J. Abrams is, like, working with them to try to figure out the details on the movie set, like, and they're spooling up a bunch of TV shows and stuff at the same time. Like, we didn't just play second fiddle, we played, like, 16th
Yeah, you
fiddle.
weren't on the orchestra. Yeah, you were watching. I gotcha.
So
Cool.
that's a big contrast to being able to fly out to Utah and sit down with Brandon and just talk with him about his intentions. Like, that's pretty awesome for working on
Yeah.
a big IP like this.
No, sorry. We have so little time, and I want to get into this so much. It's so cool. The most likely to be cut question of the interview: where do you are you a big old EU fan, or are you like, how do you feel about that, the Legends versus canon thing for Star Wars?
I
In
don't
as short
know.
as you can say.
My not the most short answer, but a little bit is, when you work on something for years, at least for me, when I work on something, I have to take such an objective view of it and such a thorough view of it that I start losing track of, like, where as a fan I feel about things. That makes me sound like a sociopath or something, but, like, I
No, you have
have
to
to put,
divorce yourself from it a bit. I totally get that.
yeah,
Yeah.
because, like, I can't put in what I personally feel. I have to put in what's right for the IP. And so I get so close that I stop, like, having that same relationship with it that I had when I was a fan. And that's okay. It helps me, I think, make a better game. But it means that, like, there are things I like and hate about both sides of things. Like, the Yuzan Vong are a little silly, right? There's obviously, like, I think Rise of Skywalker is just a terrible movie. But Andor is also one of the best Star Wars things ever made. So, like, I can't say it's all bad.
I had a debate while we were drafting Magic last night, to plug another nerdy thing, about whether or not AOTC or Rise of Skywalker was my bottom Star Wars movie.
Mm, yeah,
But
yeah.
Not to go on a tangent, but, like, Rise of Skywalker is, like, the epitome of, there are, like, an hour of awesome stuff in there, and then 2 hours of I don't know in there. And Attack of the Clones is the same way for me, so I totally get that debate.
I don't want to wade into the trouble of hot Star Wars hot takes. So, but I don't think Andor is excellent as much of a hot take. I think most people can
that's
agree on
Well,
that.
we are absolutely Dave Filoni fans or
Stone
stands
cold
on here
truth.
anyway. Like, we just give us all Star Wars as the Clone Wars and Rebels, and we're perfectly happy.
Did you watch the new Maul trailer? That was pretty
I
sick.
did
Yeah,
watch the
that was
trailer.
very cool. I'm excited for that. Back to the Cosmere RPG.
We
Thank you
we
so
will
much, Andrew.
yeah, we will stay out of the arguably most toxic fandom in
Yeah. When we do a Patreon, we will plug the We Talk Star Wars thing. Now, talking about the development of Star Wars, I kind of view the talent trees in Cosmere as the talent trees from Star Wars perfected, where you take a system that was like good and like useful, and then you just kind of do it the best way possible. I really like removing XP and numbers from the calculation. You just get a set talent choice per level. Was that influenced? Because I feel like that's the only place I see that design of talent trees.
Yeah, I definitely have. Like, I'm a very visual person, so I've worked talent trees in the second edition of Dark Heresy, which it's not. Cosmere took its place on my shelf, but in the second edition of Dark Heresy, I actually worked in some talent trees. First edition effectively had them, but it was just a network of prerequisites that wasn't visually represented, and we just made a visual representation of those prerequisites.
And like third edition D&D talent or feats are basically talent trees,
Yeah,
but
it's just kind of invisible, right? It's just you
yeah,
have to kind of figure it
it's
out yourself.
nice to have that visualization.
Yeah, so I'm very visual, so I like that a lot. Yeah, it definitely was a big influence. Like when Johnny was looking at Star Wars and what he wanted to pull over from it, kind of visual representation of talents was one of those. We hadn't initially intended for them to look so grid-like in the Cosmere. I had intended for them to look a little more organic, but just the necessities of visual layout and like, you've got these boxes, we need to fit so many on a spread. What's the most efficient way to fit a bunch of boxes on a spread is in a grid. So they ended up a little more grid-like still. We knew we didn't want to do Star Wars as kind of XP system just to pull it back from crunch a bit. That was a bigger challenge because like the XP is really easy to balance because it's so granular. Whereas like, when you level up, you buy it is a currency system in a way. A level buys one talent, right? 1-to-1.
Yeah.
But it's way less granular. So, Star Wars can get away with these talents that are just little incremental passive boosts.
Yeah. They're much more
uh,
like vanilla WoW talents than
yeah.
current
But we can't
WoW
really
talents.
do that in Cosmere because to make it worth a whole level, you need to put a bunch in there, and then it's kind of a complex talent. I will say, like, one thing I kind of wish we'd done is I would have loved to we have kind of the advancement table too for what you get each level. And I think there's a version of CosmereRPG where all of that's just in the trees and the only thing you have to look at is the trees. But
I think that would make
that's a
that
different game
page
a
a
little bit.
very big image.
Mhm.
Yeah. I actually, part of my advice is have that advancement tree in your DM screen.
Yep.
Because
Mhm.
I keep it on mine too.
it's always important. Characters always ask if they level at the end of a session. And I
And then
think it's a
being able
useful
to
tool to
tell
have.
them. Yeah.
Yeah. I have it when we do little one shots or something at higher levels, I actually have an image of it cut out that I just pull up on my screen. So, half the monitor is character sheet, half is book, and then I have that image of the advancement table so I don't miss something.
Yeah,
And
that makes
inevitably I
sense.
miss 3 hit points at level 15.
Not something that happened recently at all.
Not a specific example.
No,
Yeah.
never. Yeah, so like I wanted to just keep it a little more broad just so you can really shout out like a lot of the awesome work you did. Like, so what were some of your favorite aspects of designing it? Like, or do you have a certain skill or talent you're like really proud of? Just kind of like talk to us about like what fun you had doing that.
I think probably the most fun I had on Stormlight, at least, was with some of the surges. Now that was kind of Ross's domain and specialty was the surges, but he and I worked together pretty closely. Like he would make versions, we would iterate, and then I took on a couple of the surges that at the time were a little less defined, like tension and cohesion.
Mhm.
And of course, Ross did a bunch of work on them as well. It's a big collaborative thing, but those were really fun because there we got to extrapolate a bit more. A lot of the other surges is just how do we represent what we already know. There, Brandon would be like, I've showed like, only this much of what this thing is capable of. Can you extrapolate a bit? And we had early access to Wind and Truth to be able to see how they were used there, but there was a lot of experimentation with those where we pitched a couple uses of those to Brandon that were extrapolations that a little bit made it in, a little bit didn't. We had some pitches where Brandon was like, no, that wouldn't work with the physics for this reason. But that was a really kind of fun process because you get to kind of really analyze Brandon's systems and be a little creative with them, but then get direct feedback from the creator himself, which was a lot of fun. I also, as the lead designer, a lot of what I worry about is like big picture and making sure all of the different designers works together. So I do a lot of core system stuff. I had a ton of fun like working on some of our scene types and things. Like I really enjoyed combat. Combat's one of the places where maybe I got put a little too much crunch in the system, but like our kind of combat
Or
system
disagree.
that takes that our combat system that takes a little bit of flexible action management from like a Pathfinder Second Edition, a little bit of that initiative choice from Shadow of the Demon Lord, and kind of mixes them together into this like flexible system was probably some of what I was systems wise most energized by.
See that it's so funny that you're like, oh, that's like I just that's like two things that are probably my favorite from the design. One, I'm like the biggest stan for endeavors ever. Like I spend more time thinking about what I can do in an endeavor than I do in a combat, which I know is kind of weird for a GM a lot
No,
of
no,
times.
that makes sense.
But like and Irving always tells me it's a hot take. I absolutely hate rolling for initiative. Like it makes me so angry because I'm like, it would never work that way in a combat where it's like I'm going to go at the same time every single time combat comes around. That makes no sense to me. So I love the flexibility that you all added to the combat system. It,
As you
it's
can probably tell from my designs, I am pretty in alignment with you there. That was actually like when we were first working on Star Wars, because for those people, anybody who doesn't know, Star Wars for initiative has you kind of roll for these slots, but then anybody can take any slot, where like you can take any slot that's like allied with you. So like you can take any friendly initiative slot, but you still roll. So you're still having to do all that tracking. And that was one of my complaints to Jay, was like, because Jay Little was the lead designer on that. So like the rest of us were, but when we were early on, I was like, Jay, we could just get rid of rolling and just make it fully flexible. And he was like, Jay has one foot very firmly still in traditional RPGs. And like that was a thing where he was like, no, I want to keep this. And so you can see, as I work on systems, other systems, I definitely embrace things that fully remove that rolling step.
I mean, at least Star Wars let you roll two different abilities instead of one.
Yes, that is true.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a little more, yeah, and it hooks it a little bit more into the narrative of what's starting that scene and things. So I'm not trying to slag our old work or anything, but it was a place where I kind of evolved. It's also actually ties back into some of what we talked about with the app integrated games thing, which is when we're doing those app integrated games, one of the big considerations is, when is your system making you do fiddly upkeep for the sake of the app, right? Like if you ever have to just input data into the app so the app knows a thing, the players will resent it. And so you have to really hone your design so that the players are always, every interaction the player has with the system has a purpose in that player's mind and like emotionally for that player, instead of just being to maintain the system, or they will resent that digital app. As you bring it over to just a tabletop, like rolling initiative, well, there is a little bit of emotional component, is maintenance, right? It is you just doing something so the system can function. Like, and like you can get excited because you're going early this combat or whatever, but like I really try to either remove maintenance or give maintenance steps emotional stakes or narrative stakes to the player so that they want to do that maintenance.
Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. Just it gets to the point that when people ask like, hey, how difficult is the CosmereRPG? I always say it's self-selecting crunch, where like, because it's the talents, because you choose your time to go in combat and your action amount, like you choose how complicated you want to make it for yourself.
I think that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's tricky because sometimes the new players can accidentally stumble into some crunch when we don't want them to. But like that is the hope,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Is that people can get as much out of it as they want to dive in, and people who want to just roll some d20s and tell a story can, without feeling like they need to get all the way in there.
Yeah, without fail, my in-person group, our newest RPG player picked the most complicated pre-gens to play. And she was picking based off just the art designs. And then I'd be like, oh, Emily, okay, you're going to need to ask Nikki how that works kind of often.
Choose Artificer. Yeah. Or
well,
yeah.
Let's see. In Bridge 9, it was the Envoy character. So
Okay.
just like rousing presence was a little bit different than what she'd experienced in TTRPGs. And then in Petals, it was the chromium fairing.
Oof. Yeah. Yeah. All right.
But
That
yeah,
was
so it is
speaking
self-selecting.
of complexity creep. Ross and I had so many meetings about any of the temporal allomancies. Like those are something that like those were a nightmare
Yeah.
to like dial in.
Ross mentioned that emotional allomancies were also really tough. I think
Yeah,
he said 5 different versions.
yeah, probably.
Uh,
That sounds about right. Somewhere in there, maybe even more.
oh,
We ended it with a very narrative approach to those, which I think is good. We for a long time we had a crunchier version that really relied on focus in different ways, but those, when you're doing early design, one of the things we try to do is really swing for the fences and try like if all of your designs are safe right at the beginning, it probably means your design is a little boring. So
yeah.
we try some experiments, and there was definitely like some experiments with the emotional allomancies early on in design there that and sometimes when you swing for the fences, you gotta cut back because
Oh,
those went a little
absolutely.
too hard.
I think it's much more interesting to like start with something super cool and then be like, all right, we need to like twist the knob so we can still do super cool, but make it not unbalanced.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think was the toughest aspect of the game to balance?
Mm. Um. Well, depends on how you define balance here. I think like when it comes to like, is this too OP or not? Uh, that was probably be shard blades and plate. When it comes to like trying to balance like just systems against each other in a very kind of like designery focused, it would have to go to talking about, we talked about a talent every level and the lack of granularity there. That actually was pretty tricky. Trying to balance like the density of talent trees. We we would often get talent trees like when you're designing talents, you want every talent to be really cool and interesting and compelling. But if every talent is cool and interesting and compelling, by the time you're at like the end of tier 2, your character is dense. And honestly, like if you have a lot of active talents, you're limited in like how many you can even activate in a turn. And like characters had a lot of cool things in theory, but like in execution weren't feeling like we wanted them to feel. And so we really had to there were a lot of different iterations early on with trying to figure out what's the right density of the talent tree, how many passive talents, how many active talents, like how many kind of highlight talents that are very in-depth, complex, and thematic versus ones that are just a little bit more like uh, small improvements that don't take a lot of character present or player presence of mind to manage. That was a big. That's not really like having to do with like balance on the
Yeah.
very end, but it was
It's a
probably
more
our
esoteric version of balance, yeah.
yeah, exactly.
That's important too. Uh, it's not all like in the trenches number crunching. It's a narrative game, so there should be some more like out there stuff. I get it.
But
Um,
on the shards, like that one was just like, we ended up, I think the sacrifice we made for the sake of balance is that like to accomplish some of the scenes you see in the book, you need a character who is pretty high level, like to be those moments when you see Dalinar and Adolin leaping into battle and like the sheer number of people Brandon describes them mowing down, like, like systemically, we model most characters as individual entities. So a GM just doesn't want 12 characters in a scene unless they're just there to get, you know,
yeah.
sliced by a
Shot.
shard
Yeah.
blade because you don't want to manage all that.
Yeah. One thing I feel like is kind of missing, just from the fiction, is a sort of melee AoE strike. So, for people who don't know, area of effect, so it can affect multiple targets. I don't think there's really an ability where a shard blade can like pass through multiple guys at a time, is there?
Where did we land on?
Because wind stance, you can hit another target, and I guess you could describe it as that. But there's no like, hey, I do a spin around myself with the shard blade.
As I now have to pull out my handbook, I thought there was a talent in the Shardbearer tree.
Am I just missing it? I thought, because I'm thinking there's wind stance, there's meteoric leap,
Which Meteoric Leap is just a fantastic talent.
Yeah, love Meteoric Leap.
Never
Sorry
gets
if I
old.
just derailed everything by asking this question that was stupid. But
So there's a couple ways we tried to model that. So one is in Wind Stance, obviously, like you said, you can get additional, and then in Shard Training, which is one of it's the passive entry talent, next
yeah,
to Stone Stance. Your Shard Blade strikes now can graze additional targets up to your ranks. In
okay.
the
So the
skill you use.
grazing is supposed to be that.
So,
Okay,
by
that's
the
fair.
time you're up at like 4 ranks, every time you're swinging, you're grazing for additional targets, and like you're kind of getting those sweeps. But it's like I said, it's not Adolin cutting down 12 guys in one swing.
Yeah,
To
Which
this quite
which
the
it'd
same
be hard
degree.
to do, but you got to think those are like tier 1 minions, and Adolin's a tier 4 character.
Yeah, exactly. And like we looked at modeling that with like group enemies, like enemies that are treated as a single entity but are actually many people in the fiction and things. We pulled back from that a little bit, but I mean, to this example, like you can kind of get there and model those scenes, especially if you're kind of telling a more narrative story about a mass combat. But like,
Mhm.
I think that's a place where Johnny had a vision of the moment we wanted in the mechanics, and I don't know if we 100% got there in while we're trying to balance shard blades to work in all the different 1v1 contexts we wanted them to. So that's like a
Yeah,
place that was to answer your question about challenging to balance. That was a place that was challenging to balance the narrative outcome we wanted with everything else.
yeah, with the mechanical one, yeah. I think you guys did a fantastic job with shard blades and plate. I think they feel very like they're supposed to feel powerful. They're scary.
The
To the
injury
point
table
that
I
like,
helps.
appreciate it.
yeah,
And obviously I'm happy with where we got, but like, as what's the saying? A design is never finished, only abandoned. So like, if if I had
That's
infinite
such a
time,
great.
I'd still be tweaking, right? Like,
yeah,
uh,
obviously, yeah. So when you play the Cosmere RPG, have you done it more as a player or as a GM?
definitely GM'd more.
Yeah.
Just I'm kind of as a designer, I've kind of the forever GM, like, but I have like.
Many of you are.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
because we have others on the team, I have gotten to play in plenty of play tests. But like, my home campaign, I'm GMing it. Like I probably have GM'd more than most of the team just because like as the lead designer, it just anytime we don't have a GM for a session, it kind of defaults to me, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like so uh I'd like to play more, as I think every forever GMs, well, most
Yeah.
forever GMs say.
Do you have a character design that really speaks to you that you're excited to play that you maybe haven't, or just one you keep coming back to?
I'm always uh I my characters I worked with this woman Katrina Ostrander who I worked with her at FFG. She worked on Legend of the Five Rings with Max and things, and she always gave me crap because she always said my characters were so boring because I really like to play. She was very much like the kind of like I always need to be a badass elf kind of person, and I was always like I want to be a pencil pusher, like so I always fall back to these characters. I'm like, what is the most unlikely member of this party of surge binders or whatever else, right? Like,
Yeah.
how can I be this like unassuming person who's tagging along with them? So I'll play like the no non-radiant like all envoy character who's like kind of doddering in the corner or whatever. But as far as like cool characters doing cool things, I played in a playtest a couple times for Mistborn. I played um uh this character with steel ferrochemy and tin allomancy who so twinborn
Yeah.
um so
As almost every Mistborn design I hear about is.
yeah, I like we definitely wanted to, much like a Radiant has two surges, we felt like Twinborn was kind of the sweet spot, even though we know a lot of people are going to play in Era 1. Like, Twinborn was this nice sweet spot where you get the two powers and play them off each other. I was about to talk about what Steel Ferrochemy and
Hasn't been revealed. Do you want to reveal it on the
Allomancy
podcast?
do. Well, I mean, people know from the. I was like, probably for this podcast, most of your listeners probably don't need the Cosmere explainer as part of my answer. But uh, anyway, it was a all ranged character, so kind of my shtick was like I just used my steel to just like flee into the distance, and then like use my tin to just like shoot you. And as you came closer, I just kept running away. And actually, that character, with the way the mechanics combine on those with some of our like sharpshooter rules, was just awesome.
Yeah.
So I'd love to just, from a power fantasy side, I'd love to play that character again. But most of the time, I play the like pencil pusher or
Yeah.
paper pusher or whatever you call that.
You guys have shown everyone, I believe, tin allomancy and the hunter trees from what you're talking about, and like sharpshooter does seem like a very cool tree to pair with tin. Again, I can't wait for that book to be out and talk about it. It sounds so exciting.
Yeah, there's so many combos like that. In that way, Stormlight was pretty easy, right? It's pretty straightforward, these surges, and then Mistborn is just wild because you have
Yeah.
so many different powers that all could be combined, and like it's like, okay, well, tin, okay, we want tin to make sure it combines and like is good like from a defensive standpoint, but we also want it from like the standpoint of pairing nicely with ranged weapons. But also, what else do we see Spook do? With tin, like
Just canes.
and then and then like almost every single one of the powers had this same effect where it wants to interact with so many other parts of the system, and like in cool emergent ways. And then you have a design. You're like, oh, this is perfect. Like it interacts in all these 4 different ways we want, and then we're like, oh, but it doesn't interact in the 5th way at all. Like
Oh, no. Yeah.
Poor Ross had his hands full with that one.
I can only imagine. Now, future of CosmereRPG Plotweaver, what do you feel like you want to talk about or let us know? Obviously, as much as you want to say, but how are designs for that going? Are you enjoying it?
Oh yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun. It's freeing because, like you can make the world fit whatever you want to do mechanically, which is pretty cool, right? How do you represent this specific world in mechanics is an interesting challenge, but also like after you've been doing that for a couple of years, being able to just be like, let's just change the world to fit with what we want to do for the RPG is like, it's like, pretty nice. But there's a lot of work to do because we are kind of defining all these different settings right now, these new settings. And so you have to do a lot of narrative world building. We've brought on some new designers for that. I think we're going to announce them next month, who are going to be kind of leading each of our core settings. So as far as how much we can talk about it, one thing we're really hoping with Plotweaver is to be very open. We're not going to like hold it in secret for a while.
Yeah.
We've
Merrick
got a
said the
newsletter for
exact
people
same.
we've got a newsletter for people who are curious if you want to go to the website, and like we're going to be sharing a ton of it. We're going to have stuff people can play test like pretty quickly here this year. We're going to be doing little designer diaries with myself and the other leads on all the books so that people can kind of see our process. Because one other thing we really want for Plotweaver is we'd love for other people to be able to design and make using it, and we want to make it license wise really open for people. Obviously, like people can't write and sell original Cosmere work because that's branded setting, right? People obviously can make new Cosmere work, they just can't sell it. But one of the beauties with Plotweaver is people will be able to design in our system and sell their own work and stuff. And so we really want to support those folks who want to do that. And so part of our hope with as we start sharing more and more is that people can kind of see our process and get inspired by it. Is the hope.
Yeah. It is very inspiring and cool. And I've just been so excited to be like, how does a traditional wizard work in Plotweaver? Like, what does the Plotweaver wizard look like? And I can't wait.
Yeah,
Like, I can't wait. Yeah.
because like we've got our magic systems are very, because they're built around like, surges and metallic arts are very creativity focused. Our magic is very skill based and like player creativity based. So like
Mhm.
you can definitely see how um like more flexible magic systems like bending, to your earlier example, like Plotweaver can handle very, very well. But I will say, right now we've been talking about, for one of the settings, a more discrete kind of invocation or spell based approach, which is like a little bit more like your kind of traditional spell casting. And I'm really excited about it. I won't give too many details, but like it's one of the big things it does is integrate how you learn and find your spells into your character's story in a lot more deep way, where like every spell is something personal to you instead of just something you unlock. So there's
That's
some cool
cool.
exciting things we're working on there.
Yeah. I will maybe get to explore my Dresden Files fantasy dreams in Plotweaver.
Ooh,
So,
yeah, that's awesome.
well, thank you. Do you have any socials or projects you want to plug? Obviously, Brotherwise Games, CosmereRPG. That's why we're here. But is there
Yep.
anything you, Andrew Fischer, to plug?
Yeah. So, yeah, we got Mistborn coming out later this year. I'm sure most of you all know that already. Definitely sign up head over to the Plotweaver website. You can just Google Plotweaver, and there you can sign up for Plotweaver newsletter, and we will be sharing every month updates on the game and all the new exciting stuff you can find about what we're working on there. Um, for me personally, you can follow me basically on most social platforms at A Fisher Games, or my website Andrew Fisher Games. And if you are curious about my work over at Earthborn, you can check us out at earthborngames.com and check out our debut title, Earthborn Rangers.
Well, thank you very much. Kyle, do you want to take us away?
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I know this, as Irving joked, it wasn't a very Kyle heavy episode, but I knew you guys could go to town all day long around these designs. So I was enjoying being a spectator for the most part. So that's all we have for you guys today. But let's go ahead and roll our plot die and raise the stakes. This has been Complicated Opportunities.